Hey, this is Lexi.
This is Ari.
And you're listening to
Hotel Earth. My name is Ariana Halvai, and I am joined by my lovely co-host today, Lexi Moorhead. Everyone, say hi to Lexi.
And everyone say an even bigger hello to Milo, the sweetest bug in the whole world.
That's her pet bug.
Look how sweet.
Very. I have nothing.
Happy to be here.
I have nothing fuzzy and cuddly to present, but
yeah, don't you want a cat?
You know what you say in Italian? Mi prendi in giro. You're taking me for a spin, because I just told her over the weekend about it's an inside joke, whatever, it's not important.
It's for
That's
us.
for us.
It's for us.
We are gonna gatekeep that.
Yeah.
Bob.
I probably shouldn't be drinking out of an
Ambiguous.
apple.
Probably not. But my my handmade Led Zeppelin mug is safe. Thanks for Shan.
Yeah, that's cute.
So
I don't think I have anything. I'll just drink it off camera.
Yeah.
Don't mind me.
Can't wait to make the bloopers for this. So I guess I'll commence us here. Welcome back, everybody, to our latest installment of Hotel 360 Book Club. Hello. We're so happy to be here with you guys today, whether that's literally because I'm here with Lexi, or if you're watching this on YouTube, or however you found this, thank you for being here and hello. We are talking about I know we're not supposed to get into opinions yet, but one of the most profound memoirs I've ever read in my entire existence, 27 whole years on this earth. Only about 15 of those have I been reading memoirs. So, very, very moved by this, and I'm really excited to talk about it today. What about you, Lexi?
I'm stoked. And I think for those who are not watching, but maybe listening on a podcast sort of forum, the book we are referring to is We Will Be Jaguars, or if you're reading it outside of the US, it is called
We Will Not Be Saved by none other than Nemonte Nenquimo.
It's a fabulous memoir, as Ari said. She co-wrote it technically with her partner, Mitch Anderson. Nemonte spoke the book in Spanish, and then Mitch translated it into English so that people like Ari and I and you listeners can actually read it.
Well, how grateful am I for Mitch for being able to tell her story.
I paused because I was looking for something more than just read, because it's a very profound memoir, as we will talk about. So maybe let's just first start off, as we usually do, with some just hard copy type details about the book. Ari, did you read a physical copy, I take it?
I did. I did read the physical copy. I absolutely recommend that, but I actually do think it would read pretty well as an audiobook, I think. Like, cuz since it's a memoir, it does have a storytelling feel, and I feel like it would be really nice to listen to. I always connect more with print though, so I'm really happy I read this in print, but that's just my 2 cents. I don't even know if this book is available as an audiobook, actually.
Oh, that's a great question.
Never even checked.
I'm not sure. I also didn't check.
Because it's brand new. It's brand new. This book only came out, I think, last year in 2024. And I know it's still undergoing copyright. So,
oh, wow.
So I don't know if there's actually an audiobook version of this, but the physical one reads really, really well for me. I finished this pretty quickly. By pretty quickly, I think it took me maybe total like 2 weeks, but the real avid readers out there are laughing at that. But it took me about 2 weeks to get through. It was beautiful. And, we'll expand more on that later, but there were parts of it that I had to maybe take a little extra time to process
Take a
and
beat.
mhm. But overall, I think it was a very smooth read.
I agree, and, avid readers can laugh at me as well because I also thought it was a pretty quick read, and Ari can laugh because I'm pretty sure I picked this up in August, and I finished it this week. But I am someone who typically reads maybe only, like, 1 or 2 nights a week, so I was averaging about 3 or so chapters every half hour, and there's approximately 26 chapters, 350 pages. You all can do the math. It was very hard to put down, and I actually would recommend the hard copy. Even though this isn't my book, I'm not going to keep it because it is the library's property. I found it really helpful to be able to, like, see the way that she broke up the words because at certain points she would put in like larger spaces to sort of indicate that she was that more time had elapsed
Yeah.
or that she was starting a new like story or
Mhm.
train of thought. And the other part is that the book actually has pictures, which I don't think I'm necessarily supposed to show, but there is a large section in the book with photos that I don't think would um, obviously be accessible if we had listened to it as an audiobook. Other than that, I think before we really get into the nuts and bolts, the meat and potatoes of this discussion, we should probably give everyone a warning. If you do choose to read this book, there are discussions of sexual assault and some violence. I will. It's brief in time. It's not throughout the entire book, but if those are themes that you are uncomfortable with, I would say maybe just read reviews and appreciate the work that Nemonte is doing elsewhere. You don't necessarily have to read her memoir. Any other
Um,
housekeeping before we jump into some
nope.
grounding
Well,
thoughts?
I would like to just give a shout out to my friend Irene who recommended this book for book club. She pitched this like a while ago and we finally got around to reading it. And as I said, I'm very grateful to know a little bit about Nemonte's story now. So it was genuinely life changing for me. So grazie, Irene.
Let's talk a little bit about who Nemonte is and sort of why this book matters. Nemonte Nenquimo, the author of We Will Be Jaguars / We Will Not Be Saved, is, quote, a Warani woman, mother, and climate leader who has dedicated her life to the defense of indigenous ancestral territory and cultural survival in the Amazon rainforest. She is the co-founder of the Sabio Alliance and Amazon Frontlines and has won the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize. So she's a pretty big
She's
deal.
she's a pretty big deal and she's accomplished quite a bit you know, for everything that she's had to endure. It's really amazing.
Yes, she is a very impressive individual, and as we will discuss, this book is both a memoir and a manifesto. Nemonte, along with her partner Mitch Anderson, spent nearly 2 years bringing this powerful masterpiece to us, and to life. So, before we dive into the memoir, do you mind if I give some historical context?
I would love if you gave us some historical context. You know that we're history buffs around here.
Yes, and I think that it really matters just one for the credibility of this author, but also for people who maybe are not super familiar with what is and has been going on in the Amazon rainforest since the early 60s. I can put both my hands up because I am one of those people. Allow me to set the stage. First, the story takes place in Ecuador, primarily in the Amazon rainforest. Amazonian rainforests are some of the most biodiverse regions on Earth. And in addition to being rich in biodiversity, it is also flush with oil deposits, fertile soil, and timber, things very popular with colonizers, as we have seen from, time and time again. Now, Nemonte begins this story from her perspective as a little girl, and she was born in 1985. So we can presume this memoir begins somewhere in the early 1990s. Between 1960 and 1990, oil companies drilled, dumped, polluted, and desecrated nearly 1,700 square miles of the Amazonian rainforest in Ecuador. In lawsuits against these oil companies, people cited birth defects, cancer, and loss of subsistence. The waste left behind remains there to this day. It continuously poisons the waterways of those who depend on it for drinking, bathing, and fishing. And according to Amazon Frontlines, raising the forests during those decades, and even still now, was driven, quote, by the expansion of the oil industry through the construction of roads, pipelines, wells, pools, seismic lines, camps, and heliports, end quote. This was just the first wave of deforestation related to such construction, however, because once constructed, this led to, quote, a second wave of deforestation through rapid colonization and the establishment of pastures, because people need to eat cattle. Now, in Ecuador between 1990 and 2014, approximately 500,000 hectares of Amazonian rainforest were lost. And unfortunately, in August of this year, the Ecuadorian Ministry of Energy and Mines proposed to auction the rights for 49 oil and gas projects with an estimated worth of more than $47 billion. I'm going to pause there for a moment and just say that I don't care how much money you cite it could be worth. What you're losing has no value. Like you're going to pull oil out of the ground and sell it for $47 billion, but the forests, the culture, the people that you displace are irreplaceable. So, put a price tag on that. Why don't you? But anyways, none of what Nemonte shares is, quote, in the past, right? Like none of this is things that she's talked about or things that she is reflecting on that have stopped. Instead, this is the ever-present reality of Indigenous communities who are quite literally just fighting for their right to exist.
I'm so glad that we're opening up here with this statement, because this was the part that for me actually struck me the hardest, was that this is not this is not a story about something that takes place in a distant past.
Yeah.
Like when we hear of these kinds of like devastating um basically examples of colonization, we tend to go back in time in our heads, and I made a touch grass video that you guys can watch if you guys want, um if you want to expand on that idea. But that was the hardest thing for me to wrap my brain around, is that this is happening right now. This is happening while we were growing up. Like, this is our time period, and we treat this kind of phenomenon like it's a thing of the past, and it's something that we need to kind of break.
I agree. I had some very similar thoughts. I think that unfortunately it just isn't commonplace discussion. At least in like the spheres that I grew up in, we certainly were not discussing where our oil was coming from. We were not discussing what it took for it to even be extracted, and we certainly were not being like educated on the displacement that comes with oil extraction generally. Like none of that was ever talked about. So then to pick up Nemonte's book at the ripe age of my late 20s, it was jarring to see that this is still ongoing, even with all of the information that we have, even with all of the clear human rights violations that we will sort of touch on as we go through this discussion today. Governments seem to be able to compartmentalize when it's okay to um, violate people's rights and like basically justify it with the betterment of the economy. Like that just seems to be how it, from my perspective, works.
Yeah, exactly. It's what's the cost of our comfort?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that leads us pretty well into our first theme that we wanted to discuss, which is natural resource depletion and environmental grief.
Tell us more.
So, if we had to list motivations for why Nemonte might have shared her story, this would probably be near the top. This book really does portray the extraction of oil and timber and other resources, not just as economic, but as existential theft. And it is this concept of environmental grief that Nemonte ties, ecosystem loss to spiritual and communal trauma. She takes us through various stories in her life. Like a memoir is, which I learned in researching for this discussion, a memoir is a collection of stories about someone's life, and it takes place in like a limited time. It's not an autobiography because it doesn't span from birth to death. So this memoir spans, like we said earlier, from when she is a young girl, her fight through sort of witnessing her community be displaced, tricked, taken advantage of, into inspiring her, invigorating her really into fighting for their rights. And I'll just share a couple quick points before we really dive into discussion. Like, she shares stories from various points in her childhood. And what struck me the most was that she is a very curious child. She has a lot of wonder about her. And I think that at first glance, people might want to say that she was rebellious. She even describes herself as sort of someone that needs to have, well, she actually doesn't say this, but someone very close to her in her life describes that in order for her to learn, she has to be hurt. Like she needs it to be the hard way. She can't just take somebody's word, don't do XYZ. She has to experience it herself. So I think at first it sounds like rebellion, right? Like this person doesn't want to listen. And I do think that in some ways this memoir does feel like an act of rebellion, an act of just like standing up. But it's that standing up that makes me realize it's not rebellion, it's actually an act of bravery. It's her stepping out from the forest, so to speak, and leaving tracks that ask to be followed. She wants people to come with her to learn. And she does talk about that at various points. I can think of one towards the end of the book, um, mm, where she is mm, towards the end of the book. Ari, I'm sure that you'll recall what I'm talking about, but she is uh, pleading her case in front of someone who seems to just not care, who is like very by the book and seems to be like, well, if you can't play by our rules, then we just won't play with you at all. But it's through her sharing her people's culture and her story that eventually gets this person to soften and accept what Nemonte and her, just the people of the Amazonian forest are advocating for.
Here's the thing. For me, my journey with Nemonte as I read this book was it's funny that you say the word rebellious because that's exactly what it is. It's not quite what I thought when I was reading it. What I thought was the word curious definitely came to me. And more so, I think she was curious about, this is going to sound weird, but bear with me, about feelings. So there were things that she was experiencing as a young girl, as a young person, that felt new, not just for her, but for the entire community. And she was like, she was exploring that a little bit. She's like, oh, well, this is different. Like, let's dig a little deeper. Let's like see what's inside this box. Sometimes that led to really, really positive enlightenments for her. And sometimes that led to a lot of pain, as that sort of guiding figure that you're referring to had um, had mentioned in the in the beginning of the book. It was sort of a foreshadowing in a way that, like, okay, like if this is how you learn, like get ready to experience the wrath of the real world. Um and so yeah, the word grief was arguably just as strong for her, like that feeling, as her hope was, because
Yeah.
her grief is also part of what drove her to charge the mountain so strongly. I don't know, like for her to really I don't know why the word in Italian is coming to me faster than English. This is so embarrassing. I want to say superare.
I
To
don't
get
know what that
over,
means.
to get
Oh.
over the
Ah.
challenge. So I think that when we explore an environmental grief, for her, growing up, it wasn't environmental grief was just grief. Like this was their culture, it was their religion in a way, it was their spirituality, it was where they lived, it was where they, you know, had all of their gardens, where all their food came from. Like, and the environment wasn't a niche subject. That's something that was foreign to them. So environmental grief was synonymous with grief for this person. And I think that what she experienced, both environmentally speaking and personally,
Yeah.
in her life, was just as strong of a sort of sentiment for her as her hope was to do better for her people. So I think, as you said at the top, this is one of the, if not the number one of the top reasons, if not the number one reason for her inspiration to share this story.
Yeah. You put it so beautifully. I really don't have much to add except for pointing out the fact that when we think of environmental grief from from our perspective, I think of the biodiversity loss. I think of like the physical impact to nature is the first thing that comes to mind. But you're so right. Specifically for Nemonte and for the communities that she is advocating for, environment and personhood are one. It's not these things that are separable. So when we are talking about this environmental grief specifically relating to this experience, it it is everything. It is the
Mhm.
loss, the degradation of her
Yeah,
being, basically, of her people's being.
exactly.
I would like to actually add one thing, the communal learning about basically what they were experiencing to start being lured away from their culture, from their spirituality in some ways.
I felt too. And what it really made me ponder about is the the realization that I had having this perspective it just made it so clear to me how often this happens, and how these people, like a glimpse of what some of these Indigenous communities, not just Indigenous, just like communities in general, when they experience something like this, how that must make them feel. Because it's not the only example, right? This has been happening since like the dawn of civilization. Um, and I can't believe we have like an account now that we've been able to read. It's just one person's story telling us, giving us just like the smallest glimpse of what that can feel like, what that means, like the gravity of this. We're so disconnected from that kind of stuff. Again, we tend to think it's like something of the past. Oh, that can't be happening anymore with us now. Like, what does that have to do with me?
It has everything to do with us. Actually, no, like, and that's not me being woo-woo, it's not me being, like, it has everything to do with us. And on the topic of community, there were a few points towards the end of the book where I think it became, like, the most clear from the way that Nemonte was sharing her story. It's towards the end of the book, it's on page 287 that I'm looking at first. One of the people in the Sabiu Alliance is telling the group how their people have been separated basically by borders, by roads, and how different um, these different interjections by missionaries, by oil companies has basically split their people, split their community. And they've gone years essentially without actually communicating with each other. If you live so far apart, I asked, this is Nemonte speaking, how do you communicate with each other? Emergido shrugged. We have to take a bus or a canoe. Sometimes many months, even years go by without us talking to other villages. And Nemonte talks about how basically she remembers her network of trails and the connection that the Warani people still have. Because at this point in the story, their territory actually was probably the least infiltrated by missionaries, by oil companies. That's what the oil companies were working towards. That was partly what invigorated Nemonte to step up is, oh my gosh, I've seen what's happened to other places. Let me protect my home. And it's in this conversation that another person named Hugo says, the white world is happy when we are divided. And I think, I'm sorry it took me so long to get to that point, but it's this idea of division that really stuck with me because it is what we lose when we lose our connection to like our connection, just I guess basically with community. We become divisible, we become literally divided, we don't speak to each other, in the sense of community that once kept us protected from outside forces now leaves us susceptible. And there's a few other points towards the end of the book where they like actually bring up community. For example, on page 328, I believe it's Nemonte who's speaking, and she talks about how the auction that is about to occur of their lands is about more than just oil. It is about ending their way of life. Because to get to the oil, they have to basically raise the forest. They have to displace the people who live live in this way because they choose to, right? Like it's not like they are, as the government has portrayed in other instances, it's not like people live ignorant to the fact that there is quote unquote civilization that they could be a part of. No, they're choosing to live
Yep.
the way that they always have. But the government likes to ignore and basically abuse that. And I guess the last thing that I'll share here is that Nemonte specifically says they need to tear the community, rip up our connection to the forest, turn us into beggars, make us believe that we need their money, their pills, and their things in order to survive. That, to me, strikes as like this. It is this natural resource depletion and grief period that really drove this book, this memoir. And I think it's so important to be shared for that purpose. It's not just the indigenous peoples in the Amazon that can relate to these sentiments. It is true. We are more susceptible when we are divided. Period.
It was beautiful. The thing is I actually think that sentence is the perfect segue to our next theme. This to me was the whole, it was almost the biggest theme for me in the whole book. So the thing that gave me the most rage was this exact thing, because I know that we destroy the environment for capitalistic and economic development and gain. I know that that comes at the cost of people and communities and lives. And that all enrages me. Do not get me wrong. I'm not trying to sit here and be like, whatever, I'm like immune to that. What pisses me off the most is that they will do all that stuff and then make you dependent on their lifestyle, on
Yeah.
their comforts, on what they think is the way to live.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part for me to like to understand. Oh, the thing is, I understand it, right? But it just fills me with so much rage because you go through all of this stuff to like uproot an entire community, an entire lifestyle of people that's been working for them for centuries.
Yeah. That.
And you come in with the industrial world is new compared to these ancient civilizations. I mean, like, you come in and you tear them all apart and then make them dependent on you. And it's all so intentional, isn't it? It's like,
Yes.
well, come, you've never seen money before. Let me show you what money does. Here's what money does. Oh, you like this? Come work for me at the oil rig. Come work for me. And then you get this. And then you can buy this plastic. Then you can buy this blue dress for your daughter. Then you can actually be a good dad. You can actually provide. Like,
They and it's funny, all of these things are things that they cannot access, with a little asterisk, obviously, with a little asterisk that says things that they cannot access without the in this case, it's the white people or the Cowrie. It's the outsiders, basically. Like, they
And-
didn't have the sugar before.
Yep.
They didn't have the clothes before.
Yep.
And it does strike this idea of, like, do you need it?
Well,
You
great.
don't yeah, like
It's a good question. You don't, obviously, but the way the power dynamic works, the marketing, so to speak, and the theme number 2, enter here, neocolonialism, works, is they make you think that you can't live without it. So, I would like to transition the conversation now to examine how the legacy of colonization persists throughout still modern systems. Um, Here I use the word neocolonialism more because we're not necessarily talking about colonization in the traditional sense, right? Where like a rich country with resources goes and like literally conquests another in the name of faith or country or expansion, right? It's neocolonialism as control through economics, NGOs, corporations, and politics, not just physical conquest. So it's not colonialism necessarily in the traditional way we've learned it. It's almost disguised as development, as saviorism, as capitalistic benefit and gain. And it's the indirect control of a country's economy, politics, through economic and political policies rather than direct, like, military occupation, right? So, example given, an oil company coming to drill. The oil company isn't a country.
no.
The oil company may be represented by a country, may be subsidized by a country, but it's a private it's a private entity. So that's showing you how, in this sense of neocolonialism, it's now companies, shareholders can come in and do the conquesting.
Yeah.
And it's sold as exploration for development and the betterment of society and humanity. And it will be sold to these people that it's what's going to save them. I mean, the ripest example that's coming to my brain right now is how at some point in the book, we learn that the water supply in these indigenous communities and villages has become so polluted that it's obviously leading to serious health risks, but they can't get clean water unless they go ask the oil company themselves for it. They have to stand in a line to get like shit muddy water because they're clean water that they've always sorry, I'm just got a little excited there. Their clean water that they've always had access to is now polluted, but they're like, but don't worry, I know your food and your water is totally sorry for my French, but here's a bag of canned tuna. Here's some muddy water to keep you going. And remember to thank us on your way out. Tips appreciated. Like, that is literally the mentality. So, of course, these people are going to become dependent on them because you took everything away from them. Like, what do they have?
Yeah.
Neocolonialism. So, it's sold as this really good thing. It's sold as like, oh, but this is going to provide opportunity and money. And like, I know your daughter has been eyeballing that blue dress the missionary girl was wearing. You can buy that stuff with money. It's like shiny and exciting. And oh, the thing is for these people, community, as you said, is such a big value for them that the
Yeah.
ability to feel included also by missionaries, which I'll get to later, is really important for them.
Yeah.
Like, so, of course, all of that sounds really nice, and they want to feel included. And I mean, it's human nature too, isn't it? I mean, when I was a kid, I know this is maybe not relevant, but whatever. I think we've all felt the human nature in us feeling like we coveted what we couldn't have.
Yeah. And there's
Um,
also like a flip side to that. Like, okay, let's take the food, water, material things like dresses and things like that. Let's take that out. There was also a promise of medical clinics, of schools, of these things that were supposed to of teeth, dentistry. Yeah, there was this promise of like, okay, maybe the best thing that we can offer you is um I don't want to call it the word civilization is coming to mind, but it's not that. It's like genuine betterment, like things that you can say, okay, learning if we are going to have to integrate in some regards with modern society, like maybe it would behoove us to have familiarity with arithmetics. Maybe it would be good to be able to speak Spanish. Like there are things where maybe you could sit there and say, okay, if you are going to come and pillage our land, at the very least, maybe you could provide like a hospital so that we can not be sick from your disease. Maybe you can provide a school so that we can learn your language and not be taken advantage of when we don't understand what we're signing or what we're agreeing to. Like maybe there is some justification where you should provide that, but did they? Did the schools ever come? Did the hospitals? Did this like actual because it reads sort of as like, okay, this is an offer of equity. Let's give you the opportunity to maybe even like try to be on the same playing field. No, never. And it also, I'm sure that you're gonna get to this in a moment here, but there was also this convincing that took place of your way of life is lesser than ours, than the people who are coming to take your resources, to uproot your way of life. Um, so you should get on board or get out of the way, basically.
sorry, I just got so many feelings from this one particular part of the book where that was happening. She was having this dialogue with someone she really trusted, and it just ended up being so rooted in just evil and abuse and um no it yeah. So I wanted to just emphasize that while this was sold as exploration for betterment, like you're saying, or um, for development or for the kind of like communal software upgrade of these people's livelihoods, the truth was that you end up putting locals in a chokehold to build dependency on the industry's expansion, and it stops at no cost.
Yeah.
We even got a peek into how these industries are so powerful that they will rig like lab results and things like this, like that. If anyone does go peeking around, that they won't actually ever find any like hard proof that they're being murdered, basically. So, and I wanted to, I just thought this would be interesting. I wanted to just give like a very brief breakdown of the kinds of neocolonists that were present in Ecuador's Amazonian rainforests throughout the last century. It actually started with a name we know very well, Shell oil.
Oh.
I think at the time it was called something else, but it's modern day Shell nonetheless. They were not there that long, and it started in the 1930s and um, went through till the 40s. They were very early explorers of this area, and there was no major production, but they left infrastructure, the Shell Mera, which is actually the runway that was talked about a lot in Nemonte's childhood, where she would see the missionaries come in on a plane. That was from them, and it did indirectly enable missionary access because of that runway. Is it runway or is it airstrip? I
Potato,
don't know.
potato.
Whatever. I don't want you guys thinking I'm talking about like, Bella Hadid walking on a runway. but, um, but yeah, so Shell opened this conversation and opened the access in a way, while they weren't necessarily responsible in that particular area for lots of production. Don't worry, Shell, you're not off the hook. They did enable the access for later Texaco and Chevron, which that development and large-scale drilling started in the 60s and went on through the 90s. For sure, Texaco and Chevron impacted the Waorani tribe directly.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's lawsuits related to both Texaco and Chevron because Chevron purchased or acquired
Yep.
Texaco. So
this is often referred to as the Amazon Chernobyl. Like their development has that infamous of a reputation. So that's fun. And finally, so far I've talked about 3 American oil companies, okay, in Ecuador. Then eventually Ecuador wants their own piece of the action. This is a great example of how a company's economy is actually like forced to follow suit to keep up.
a country's
Sorry, what did I say?
companies.
Thank you. This is a good example. Thank you. This is a good example of how a country will literally drop all of their ancient and indigenous values to keep up with this sort of economic and capitalistic kind of fight and game that now most of the world is running toward. But eventually Ecuador enters the chat themselves, and Petroecuador and others from the 90s until now, up until present, are still participating in ongoing production in partnership with said foreign firms a lot of the time.
Yeah. The
And
auction that we literally just talked about at the beginning of the episode to
Mhm.
sell off,
Yep.
I forget how many acres of land just for a
Yep.
few $1 billion.
Well, and like when you think about it too, so this neocolonialistic concept that is happening here, now Ecuador's been forced, not that I am trying to
Defend.
or justify Ecuador's participation, but it's almost like these external foreign companies come into a country, drill, they benefit from it, and Ecuador's like, well, what the fuck? Like, that's my country. I should be seeing benefits from this too. And then they kind of get in onto the greed and to the action, and they put their own people at risk. Not just risk, but in danger, literally. So this is still happening, the continued deforestation and indigenous resistance, even with Ecuadorian-based companies. We see a sort of win, in a way, Well,
Mm.
it's always a win when this stuff is recognized.
Yeah.
I say in a way because I want more to be done, but the
Yeah.
court has officially recognized that the deaths and extreme vulnerability of other indigenous tribes in this area,
Who are they're chosen to be they're voluntary
Mhm.
no contact
Yes,
groups.
which means they don't want to participate in the capitalistic bullshit. Okay. So these are called the Tagaeri and Taromanene. I hope I said that right. Sorry if I didn't.
You might have said it with an Italian accent, but
Va bene, ma sono italiana a questo punto. Va benissimo. Result from discriminatory state policies that prioritize oil extraction while ignoring these indigenous people's existence. And by classifying the Amazon as vacant land for decades, Ecuador facilitated land seizures, displacement, and conflict. This was a this comes from a landmark decision for indigenous rights. And I as I said, I consider it a win when this gets recognized, but it's like, I mean, vacant land.
yeah.
They were recruiting the indigenous people to help. Like, what do you mean it's vacant? Like, you literally acknowledge them and you force them to come work with you. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
Anyway.
and as a very brief aside, we in there's a concept and property of first in time. Basically means that whoever gets there first has rights to the land, to the resource, to the thing. And that is only observed when it is the white people or the person with the power. In this case, I don't necessarily want to. Anyways, in this case, it's the Ecuadorian government being like, okay, yeah, all of you indigenous people were here first for sure, but we're going to just pretend like that's not true. And the same thing is done in the United States. I'm not trying to sit here and be like, we didn't do the exact same thing, but yeah, it's very interesting. These concepts of rights, land ownership, etc., are only observed when it benefits the people with the power in the first place. If you are the disenfranchised, they want to keep you disenfranchised because they
Yep.
make you disenfranchised.
Yep. And
And
sorry,
no,
go
I was
on.
just gonna say, I think that this really highlights the tension between indigenous sovereignty and global capitalism, but it's not just indigenous people that are exploited by this. Like Mitch Anderson points out, I believe in the acknowledgments he points out just in his brief excerpt at the end, like, this is about saving everyone. Like, it's not just like these themes are applicable to our own lives because they are not isolated events. It's not a one-off that this just happened. So, anywho.
Well, exactly. And you brought that up. It was exactly what I wanted to bring up, a little text from the book on page 342, which I think actually speaks to your point about Mitch also saving white people. At the right before the paragraph break or the page break, we have this is right after a big lawsuit, and he quotes, or I quote him, saying, "And you thought the lawsuit was only about saving the forest from oil," he said. "It's also about saving the white people from themselves." I was like, what? Did you just hit that right on the nose? Like, and I think that's open to a bit of interpretation. They don't expand too much on it, but I think there's something to be said about our disconnect and how this stuff has become so normal for us.
This stuff being the exploitation.
Yeah. Yes. Or and the abuse and the the exploiting at all costs.
Yeah.
The removal of us from the connection with nature, from the connection with other people, with and in growing a new connection with money instead, or gain, or growth. I think that's what I took from that is we do need to be saved. I think. Well,
We need a
personal anecdote. That was a personal thing. I didn't mean to make it that dramatic. But I mean, this is dramatic, but what I'm trying
Yeah.
to say, what I'm trying to say, apologies, is that I think that's a really interesting concept. Like we come in and we being white people come in um forcing these people to do what we say, and look the other way so that we can exploit as we wish, when in doing it all because we want to we're saying we're saving them, and we end up being the ones who maybe need to look introspectively and consider maybe we need saving and maybe we could learn something from Indigenous communities because seems like they found a good harmony. I think there's a lot to learn from these communities. So I found that very interesting.
Well, I think the idea that you're really touching on, and I think really we'll talk more about in this next theme, is the paternalistic approach to problem solving. And that I think is partly, I think personally, that is tied predominantly to religion.
Okay.
Personally, at least
Personally?
in the way that, certain monotheologic religions currently approach problem solving, like, one, they're typically male-centric, so, like, that's one thing, to bring up, and, Nemonte does touch on some of these ideas herself within her own culture, this idea of women leading and women being the, decision makers in, communities, but also paternalistic, gender aside, looking at it from a group with power saying that they know more than the group, who doesn't necessarily actually have less power, but in this situation is more susceptible to being taken advantage of because of the resources
Yep.
that one group has.
Yep.
And in this particular case, it's the group that's backed by the government. It's the group that is going to have more firepower in some regards,
Yep.
that is going to do it whether you like it or
Yep.
not. So either get on board or, again, get out of the way. And we
Yep.
did see that. You just spoke about the Tigeri and Taromenene peoples. They are living in voluntary isolation, but there was a conflict that basically was instigated by the oil company, where a large group of those peoples was killed, like, violently. Maybe I can't say that. They were violently removed from this plane of existence because of the oil companies. Like, anyways, let's I'll stop. I'll get off my soapbox before I get really too far gone. Let's
We
talk about this theme that you have coming up next.
what you just said about this kind of this paternal dynamic that we have, I think is exemplified quite well in the presence of missionaries in the Indigenous communities, which is our next theme. I want to preface this by saying I'm going to keep this I'm gonna stick to the point here, do my best. I don't need to sit here and explain what a missionary is, or I'm not even here to criticize that. Um, what I what I would like to point out instead is the impact that it had on these specific Indigenous communities. So I want to explore the idea of spirituality, the idea of culture, how it can be disrupted, and the role of religion in colonization. Okay, so I do believe that everyone should be free to express and practice their own religion. How you express your faith or your spirituality should be your choice and your decision. The issue arises when that stuff starts to be forced on others, and when it not only gets, maybe conceptually forced on you, but when you physically have to start, sorry, go on.
I just want to clarify really quick. When we say forced on other people, we do not mean like you see them practicing and you take up issue with it. You feel like you're being forced to now participate
Yeah.
because some people have issues with that. That's not what we're talking about.
No.
We're talking about indoctrination. We're
Yes.
talking about making people forcibly, physically making them convert to your religion. Okay, continue.
I really appreciate that clarification. Yeah, I'm not just talking about like practice and people observing your practice. I am in this particular case, there are documented examples of missionaries influencing these indigenous communities in multiple different ways, but one of the most profound being how their faith in God, and B, how they need to collaborate with oil companies. So their faith in God, I mean, that's not how they express their spirituality. Their faith is in the forest. So
And in their ancestors.
and in their ancestors and their stories. Okay, so it has, it's already we're, in my opinion, crossing a major boundary when we come into their land, build our houses using their fucking resources, and start telling them what to do,
what to think.
and what to think, and that they'll get rewarded if they think this way with all of this, whatever they're deciding to entice them with at the time. Okay, there's that. Then we get into the point of, what was the other point I made? Oh, making them collaborate with oil companies. So, as I already mentioned, interestingly enough, Shell's short-lived oil presence indirectly shaped later events. But here's what my research can tell us. When the US-based evangelical groups, the Mission Aviation Fellowship and the Summer Institute of Linguistics and Wycliffe Bible translators, began working with the Waorani communities in the 1950s, they used Shell's abandoned airstrip at Shelmetta as their logistical hub. Okay, so already we're seeing how the two were kind of enmeshed in their mission. So while Shell was not technically the company responsible for the widespread oil contamination that occurred later, this was mostly Texaco and Chevron, which started in the 60s, late 60s, Shell's early exploration helped open the region to both missionary and industrial activity. All Waorani people lived uncontacted in the Ecuadorian Amazon until the late 1950s, when American Christian missionaries began to force contact on these indigenous groups to evangelize them. And a few years later, the U.S. oil company Texaco worked with the missionaries to accelerate their forced contact campaign and remove Waorani people from their oil-rich lands. So it was a collaborative effort. And
we see this actually in Nemonte's story, just to sort of like, again, tie it back to her perspective. Maybe it's a spoiler in some regards, but because of the contact with the missionaries, there were children being sent away to missionaries in foreign places. So this is like the separation that Ari is talking about. Please continue.
Yeah. I mean, even Nemonte herself ended up on her own little mission trip when she got a little bit older. So we see how. Okay, so we can see the physical displacement. Okay, so people get sent away, people get split up. The communities are getting split up because of oil exploration, which is basically enabled by missionary presence. What's not so obvious that you learn from reading this story is I'm going to go back to my top point, is the cultural disruption. So not only are these indigenous groups, as the Waorani tribe, forced to take on a new faith, okay, and basically abandon what they already know in order to basically survive in their own community because of new rules that are coming from missionaries that they didn't ask for. Um, Not only is that happening, but also the disruption of what they do know. Okay, so you're
Mm.
enforcing something that they've never had to really deal with before, and they don't understand. They don't speak the language. They don't read the Bible. They don't read. They don't count. Like it's not it's not part of their daily lifestyle. But you now are just what by doing that, you're also simultaneously disrupting what they do know, both physically from disrupting and exploiting the forest, which is so vital for them and their survival, but also telling them that everything they know isn't true or isn't as valid as they
Know
have
it to be.
know it to be. So it's a really big sort of separation spiritually and physically.
Yes. Well, and to your sorry, keep going, keep going, keep going. I don't wanna jump ahead because I feel like I know what you're gonna say, and it's biting at me, but keep going.
Well, I just want to mention that we've seen wins here too. So there was a landmark ruling, as I mentioned before, on uncontacted Indigenous peoples' rights to help protect them from these damages happening in the future. Lovely. In the ruling, the judges emphasized that Indigenous peoples living in voluntary isolation are particularly vulnerable to impacts on their environment, also their culture. Thus, any activities that could affect their territories, like oil drilling, must be carefully evaluated. I would like that to be a little more specific, please. But the court ordered the Ecuadorian government to apply the precautionary principle when making decisions about future oil operations. And this principle basically means that even in the absence of scientific certainty regarding oil exploration and exploitation projects' impacts on this territory, effective measures must be adopted to prevent serious or irreversible damage, which in this case would be the contact of these isolated populations. Um, and by contact, it ties into this idea of the spirituality because this is how they choose to live and how they choose to express their faith in the forest and their ancestors. So I just found this particular ruling so um so interesting because it's not just touching on the environmental and the health impact, but it's also trying to acknowledge that this is how they choose to live spiritually, and we need to respect that because it's none of our business. So um,
Yeah.
this ruling is the first time an international court has ruled on whether a government has done enough to protect the rights of people living in voluntary isolation. Maybe in the description of this video, we will link the landmark ruling for you guys to read about.
I believe the plaintiffs in that case
Yep.
were the two little girls from this book. Let us all remind ourselves, this was happening to Nemonte in the 90s, right? Like, colonialism and other examples we've seen what happened here in the United States with our own indigenous populations. What happens when you indoctrinate them, when you literally take their stories from them, you adulterate them, and what you give back is basically that's all a lie. This erasure happens of other things. The stories themselves become lost. These indigenous cultures are mostly based on oral storytelling. There's not a written record of these memories that are literally passed from generation to generation to generation. So when you take that away, when you have this disconnect in storytelling, you are literally erasing any culture that had been passed down for generations. And with that also comes, as Nemonte points out in her book, that comes at a serious uh, cost for them medicinally as well, because you have these people, I believe she called them shamans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to make sure that I was using the proper term. She talks about these powerful shamans that have knowledge of what what basically can cure ailments, how to treat people when problems arise is gone.
Yep.
Because not only were they teaching the young people these new ways and telling them to forget about what you've been told by your parents, your grandparents, by the elders in your community, but those people, specifically those older people, become more isolated. And so then there's no one
Yep.
that is connecting with them. So it is just incredibly upsetting, the erasure that happens.
I think nowadays it can be really hard to communicate how important stories are. Storytelling is how we communicate with each other. I think that even dialogue between friends is often a type of storytelling. I think that the way that we often connect, what we pull on the heartstrings, throwback to our first book club video, is through compelling storytelling. And this isn't just writing a story. This means it's folklore. It's not just it's lore in general, but it's it's a part of you.
Yeah.
And for us living in a modern age, we're detached from that sometimes. Like, yes, we are two people who enjoy reading. We appreciate a really good story, whether that's expressed in music, film, art, or a book. But for some communities, it's not like just a little hobby. Like, it's not some cute indie thing, it's what is keeping them going. It's the basis of their survival. It's brought to attention multiple times in this book that the stories of these communities is everything. Like, they can't
Yes.
there is no knowledge without it. Like you said, that's their form of documentation
There
for
is
everything.
no Warani without their stories.
Yeah.
The very beginning of the introduction, Nemonte writes in her introduction, "For us, stories are living beings. They breathe life into our homes, into our forests. They pulse in our blood, in our dreams. They stalk us like jaguars, clack like peccaries, sail like macaws, run like fish. They are powerful beings like rainbows. They bring peace. Like lightning, they bring war, and they are always changing. That's how we know that they are alive. And a story dies when no one tells it."
Chills. I think that just is a really good kind of peek into the psychological and social effects that can happen when we start uprooting these traditional cosmologies with Western ideas.
I agree. And I also think what happens, like, this is just an illustration of, I think, truly the disconnected lifestyle that the Western world subscribes to, where we act like these very straightforward things, we're somehow above them. I I think we've talked about gossip before. Things like gossip and connecting with others through story are things that are crucial to society and to specifically community. And even maybe more specifically than that, to culture. Basic is not the word I'm looking for. Inherent, maybe.
Okay.
Like something that is within all of us that we maybe take for granted how powerful it truly is.
Okay. Like innate.
Innate. Thank you. That is the word I was looking for. It's these tugs of outrage and hope that really are what make this memoir so powerful, so incredibly powerful.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that, again, is a great segue to how we'd like to sort of wrap up this conversation with our next theme.
Yes. Environmentalism, hope, and action. Indigenous leadership is the future of sustainable environmental strategy. Let me say it one more time.
Do it again.
Indigenous leadership is the future of sustainable environmental strategy. We need to move away from this paternalistic approach, and we also need to allow people to have self-determination. I think what's gone awry in a lot of the world is this idea that somebody knows better than us and we just allow them to take advantage of us. And I am not victim blaming in any way, shape, or form. That is not me trying to say like we should know better or like how dare people allow themselves to be taken advantage of. I don't think anyone in their right minds would say that is
Yep.
how it works, so that we should be upset with the people who fall victim to this power struggle. But it is the balance of outrage and hope, truly, in this memoir that I think makes it not only so powerful, but is what will carry it. Like that is what gives it the momentum. And it's all the idea that this really started in some ways. It's a very simplistic way to say that this was sort of born out of a rainwater catch system. So I think it's like the middle part of the book. Nemonte is introduced to someone who I think changes the trajectory of her life. And in 2019, that basically morphed into a court order to protect more than 500,000 acres of Amazonian rainforest and Waorani territory from oil extraction. Her rage and her passion and her people's passion to protect themselves then went on in 2023 to basically rally the people in her country. Okay, so like it started in her communities with the rainwater catch systems. It expanded to the protection of those communities. And then from there, the entire country then voted on a referendum which culminated in Ecuadorians voting to actually reject oil drilling in Yasuni National Park, which is a land where some uncontacted peoples actually live. So it's this momentum, this hope that transcends just the communities that are directly impacted. Nemonte talks about after their win in court, going out into the city streets and being celebrated by just passerbys who were just excited and hopeful for them. There is something about the hope and the justice in her memoir that I think transcends even borders. It transcends culture. And honestly, her work is not going to stop with these wins. Um, and what she has inspired, I think, will go on for decades to come because she and her people, her culture, what they stand for, I think is something that almost everyone as an individual can resonate with. This fight for what you love and believe in can be protected, and it's when we stand together that we can have these cascading impacts.
What I'd like to say is I'm grateful for her story because it was able to move me in a way that I feel that maybe a lot of people in my position wouldn't have been able to be so touched if she wouldn't have shared her experience with this. Now her story has a lot of grief, and it has a lot of really, really hard obstacles that she's endured. So I'm not trying to say I'm grateful that those things transcended, but what I am really grateful for is her desire to endure and to resist and do better for the future generations.
Yeah.
And as you were saying, how I was able to communicate through some really hard walls like cultural differences, language barriers, lifestyle, and things like that. That it's these kinds of efforts that show us that that's possible, and that we are obviously more impactful in numbers and community.
With that, if you listeners would like to support Nemonte's work, then you can go to Amazon Frontlines. We will put all of the links in the description. You can take action for free by sending a message to the Constitutional Court of Ecuador. And there's notes on what specifically you can say that will help their efforts. You can also donate if that feels more within range. We would like to invite you to share your reflections in the comment sections or on social media. We have a couple of prompts / questions if you could humor us. The first is, what did this book teach you about interconnectedness between people, land, and spirit? Another question that we have for you is, how might this book change how you engage with environmental justice or social work? And lastly, if you could ask Nemonte Nenquimo one question, what would it be? One last thing is, I would like to issue personally a huge thank you to Nemonte and her partner Mitch and the Wurwani people for sharing these stories. I truly cannot tell you how much this has changed my perspective and really invigorated me to want to keep going. So thank you.
Yes, I share that sentiment. And I think that I saw another layer of how we need to reconnect with Indigenous and ancient practices and find a harmony between them and the way forward with industrial and technological development. So you'll hear more about that in our upcoming podcast season, won't you?
That you will.
You guys should totally guess what our next season is going to be about, given that hint.
Ooh.
But also our Substack has a private, like a subscriber chat that's just mostly for book club. So go there, subscribe to our Substack. You get a newsletter from us once or twice a month. And you can also directly engage with us, ask us questions, and talk about the book, talk about upcoming books we're going to be reading. All book club updates are going to be
primarily on Substack.
So consider hopping on over there. Thank you, Lexi, for your time today. This is a lovely conversation.
Thank you.
As usual.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, stay tuned for our next installment of book club. We are still deciding what we're going to read, so
I will always take suggestions.
Always take suggestions, but it's another incentive to just go subscribe to our Substack, because you'll be the first to know when we decide
what we choose. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, leave a review, all of those good things. And
tell your friends. Tell your friends about us.
Tell your friends.
Because
tell your dog about us.
Tell your dog too. Your boyfriend, your situationship, your
man's who's not your man's.
Your girl who's not your girl. Your mom, your dad, your auntie.
Your friend.
Also,
your frenemy.
Frenemies too. It's like I bet you don't listen to this podcast because you're not cool enough.
Don't gatekeep us. That's not. Do not gatekeep us.
Cool people don't gatekeep. Ciao.